Chicago Fire is bound to repeat Halstead and Upton's utterly disrespectful breakup in Chicago PD. When Chicago PD shocked viewers by tearing apart Detective J. Halstead and Detective Haley Upton in one of the most frustrating, anticlimactic ways the one Chicago universe has ever seen, the fallout was intense. Years of character development, a slow-burn romance that actually delivered on its promise, and the emotional investment of millions of fans were all wrapped up in a few rushed scenes, some awkwardly vague lines about needing space, and the cruel implication that one of the strongest couples in the franchise could be broken not by dramatic tragedy, but by lazy convenience. Now, Chicago Fire fans are looking at the state of certain relationships on Firehouse 51, and the writing on the wall is starting to look eerily familiar. The fear? That the NBC drama is walking straight into repeating that same utterly disrespectful breakup playbook, and doing it to one of its own beloved couples. The Halstead-Upton split still stings for fans because of how unearned it felt. This wasn't a relationship that imploded overnight from lack of chemistry. It was one carefully built over years, overcoming professional tension, emotional walls, and life-or-death situations that most couples can't even imagine. Halstead and Upton had been through near-death shootings, betrayals from within the department, and morally gray cases that tested their ethics. But they stuck together. Then, out of nowhere, Halstead left the show mid-season in a rushed exit, moving to an overseas military contractor role that felt wildly out of character. The series didn't even bother to give them a proper goodbye scene that honored their history. Instead, we got fragments. Phone calls we never heard, awkward glances from Upton, and a slow, depressing fade to black on their marriage. It was a breakup without a confrontation, without closure, and most unforgivably, without respect for the story that had been told. Sound familiar? That's because Chicago Fire already has several ingredients simmering in the same pot. Take a closer look at the trajectory of Brett and Casey's romance after Jesse Spencer's departure, or Kid and Severide's on-again, off-again commitment struggles. Both storylines have been handled with bouts of long-distance drama, questionable communication choices, and stretches of absence that test the audience's patience. In both cases, the show has shown a worrying comfort level with letting a relationship drift off into uncertainty rather than either committing to making it work or ending it with the emotional weight it deserves. If Fire isn't careful, it could give us its own version of the Halstead-Upton implosion, a romantic arc collapsing not because it should, but because the show doesn't know how to keep it alive when one actor's availability changes. Let's start with the Brett-Casey situation. Casey's exit in Season 10 was one of Chicago Fire's most bittersweet moments. Fans understood that the actor needed a break, and the story decision to have Casey move to Oregon to care for the Darden boys made emotional sense. The Brettsy romance was left in a long-distance limbo, but at least initially, the writers made an effort to keep it alive. Phone calls, video chats, occasional visits. Then the cracks started to show. Whole episodes went by without even a mention of Casey. Brett's storylines became increasingly separate, and the long-distance relationship became more of a vague background fact than an active part of her character's life. The parallels to Upton living in Chicago while Halstead was half a world away are hard to ignore. When Chicago PD wrote Halstead out, they seemed to believe that simply keeping the marriage technically intact for a handful of episodes would be enough to preserve fan goodwill, until they quietly confirmed off-screen that the couple had split. It was an approach that felt cowardly, as if the writers didn't want to deal with the emotional mess of showing Upton and Halstead actually break up. Instead, they just didn't. The audience was left to piece it together from hints and sad expressions. The risk for Chicago Fire is that Brettsy could meet a similar fate. One week they're still together in theory. The next week a character offhandedly mentions that it didn't work out, and that's it. Years of build-up gone in a blink. Then there's Kid and Severide. 4 years, SisterWives was one of the most solid relationships in the Firehouse 51 roster, withstanding personal losses, career challenges, and even the occasional jealous ex. But Season 12's storyline, where Severide suddenly left town for an arson investigation program, without much warning or discussion with Kid, was deeply reminiscent of the way Halstead ghosted out of Upton's life under the guise of work. Yes, Fire brought Severide back eventually, but it planted the seed that their relationship is vulnerable to abrupt, unilateral decisions. If the show ever finds itself in a position where Taylor Kinney needs more time away, the temptation to replicate the Halstead Upton pattern could be strong. Send Severide away on another work-related mission, let the couple fade apart off-screen, and sidestep the actual breakup conversation. If Chicago Fire wants to avoid falling into the same trap, it needs to confront its own relationship arcs with more courage. Long-distance romances in television can work if they're treated with intentionality. For example, Fire could keep Brettsey alive with regular, meaningful scenes that show the couple navigating their separation, making real sacrifices, visiting each other, tackling disagreements over video calls. The point isn't that they must stay together forever. It's that their journey, whether toward a breakup or a reunion, should feel like a natural extension of who these characters are, not a casualty of behind-the-scenes scheduling. Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe my sister wives to our channel and stay with TS. Before starting the video, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button and give this video a like up. Chicago Fire Season 14 is bound to repeat Chicago PD's frustrating Haley Upton and Jay Halstead split. This type of breakup is something we've seen plenty of times in the One Chicago universe, with Chicago PD offering one of the most disrespectful breakups of all time. It was obvious that a romance was in the works as Halstead and Upton of the Chicago Police Department became closer. In their own way, they even got married, bringing the oneness we worked so hard to witness. Everything changed when Halstead left, and the show ruined the relationship rather than demonstrating that a long-distance love can succeed. This is something that Chicago Fire Season 14 runs the risk of doing, especially based on the track record of other Dick Wolf Universe TV shows. However, there is a way that the series could avoid such a problem. Why Halstead and Upton's split in Chicago PD is so disappointing. Halstead ghosting Upton was completely out of character. Ahead of Chicago PD Season 10, Jesse Lee Soffer announced that he was leaving the series. We got to see a 3-episode exit storyline, but the issues for Halstead and Upton came after that and mostly off-screen. Halstead chose to re-enlist in the army, and he ended up off the grid. It was only supposed to be for one term, but Chicago PD changed his character by having him completely ghost Upton as she tried to talk with him. He didn't even tell her personally that he was upping his commitment to the army. In the end, Upton chose to serve divorce papers, realizing that she couldn't keep holding onto the man she loved, leaving us without full closure for the couple. It broke everything that Halstead and Upton had fought for up to this point. In the end, Upton chose to serve divorce papers, realizing that she couldn't keep holding onto the man she loved, leaving viewers without full closure for Halstead and Upton. There wasn't even a reason to do it this way, as a lot of people make a long-distance relationship work with someone in the military. Military spouses can have communication problems, but successful relationships work through them. Upton could have mentioned she'd spoken to Halstead to show their relationship was working. Chicago Fire is likely to break up Carver and Violet with no real reason to. Carver and Violet have just gotten back together. The Chicago Fire Season 13 finale saw Carver and Violet finally get back together. It had been a long wait, but it came with the knowledge that this relationship wasn't going to work. Before the year-ender, however, we learned that both Jake Lockett and Daniel Keary were leaving the series. There is a chance that Chicago Fire will at least offer some exit storylines. Lockett could appear in the first couple of episodes to set up a goodbye, as we already know that he put in a request to transfer to Denver, and he didn't say that he had pulled that request. With the exit, though, there isn't a chance to establish Carver and Violet as a couple. They're going to end up splitting for no real reason, disappointing those who had been ready for them to get back together. At least if they had been together for the season and showed they were struggling, we could accept that a long-distance relationship didn't work. The only way that a breakup could be respectful is if there are phone calls or text messages between them that show they have tried but can't make it work. Chicago Fire owes it to us to be more respectful ending this relationship after waiting so long. We need time to see Violet and Carver together, but that can't happen. The only way that a breakup could be respectful is if there are phone calls or text messages between them that show they have tried but can't make it work. Chicago Fire owes it to us to be more respectful ending this relationship after waiting so long. Can Chicago Fire prevent Carver and Violet from breaking up? The Dick Wolf universe doesn't do long-distance couples. There is a way to change it all, and that's to create a successful long-distance relationship between Carver and Violet. While these types of relationships are hard, they're not impossible. There could be a long-term plan for Carver and Violet to be together, which allows us to believe that they can make it. Sadly, the Dick Wolf universe hasn't had the best track record when it comes to long-distance relationships. Chicago Fire tried after Casey left just after getting together with Brett, but it was clear from Brett's conversations with Violet and Kid that it wasn't easy, and they were on the verge of a breakup. It was only when Kara Kilmer chose to leave the series that Chicago Fire's Brett and Casey were able to be happy together. Brett moved to Portland to be with Casey, but they did get their wedding on screen. Perhaps One Chicago is planning something similar for Carver and Violet, although it could only happen if the latter ends up leaving Firehouse 51 as well. This would make their proposed reunion bittersweet rather than just plain joyful. After all, Violet is a beloved long-term member of the team. In Chicago Med, Natalie Manning and Will Halstead broke up after Natalie left the hospital. It was only after Will decided to resign that we learned the two had been back in touch, and he moved to be with her. With past experiences, it's hard not to expect the same for Chicago Fire. Enjoy Screen Rant's primetime coverage? Click below to sign up for my weekly Network TV newsletter. Make sure to check Network TV in your preferences and get the inside scoop from actors and showrunners on your favorite series.